I had barely reached my car when my phone started exploding. 47 missed calls from my mother, 18 from my twin sister, voicemails, texts, panic. Just 1 hour earlier, they were laughing at me across the dinner table. My mother had leaned back in her chair and said, "Gold and dirt are not the same." She used those words to explain why they gave my share of the wedding fund to my sister. Then my sister smiled and clapped like it was the best joke she'd ever heard. They thought humiliating me was the end of the story. They had no idea that by sunrise, vendors would freeze payments, contracts would stall, and their perfect wedding would begin to crack. I looked at my screen and sent one text. "Why are you begging a piece of dirt? But if you want to know how a family can destroy itself that fast, you need to know what they had been doing to me for years." It started years earlier, in a house where love was handed out unevenly, then called normal. My sister and I were twins. Same birthday, same last name, same roof. That's where the similarity ended. She walked into rooms like she belonged there. Loud laugh, fast smile, always performing something. Adults loved that about her. They called her spirited, charming, full of life. I was quieter. I liked structure, plans, knowing where things stood. I asked questions when something didn't make sense. In our house, that made me difficult. At first, I thought that was just personality. Kids believe what they're handed. If everyone keeps repeating a story, you start wearing it like it fits. So she became the fun one, and I became the one expected to understand. That role sounds harmless until you live inside it. It meant if she forgot chores, I should help. If she lost money, I should cover it. If she snapped at someone, I should be mature enough not to react. Funny how maturity always gets assigned to the child receiving less. I noticed it in small moments first. Birthday parties where her cake was bigger because she liked attention more. Family dinners where her stories got the table, while mine got polite nods. School events where my mother never missed a single dance recital, but somehow had conflicts every time I won something academic. I used to scan the audience anyway. Part of me knew she wouldn't be there. I just didn't want to admit it yet. That's the thing about favoritism. It doesn't always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it shows up as absence so often, people stop naming it. Relatives would come over and praise my sister's beauty, her energy, her social life. Then someone would gesture toward me like an afterthought. "And Emily's the smart one." They meant it as a compliment. It never felt like one. Smart was useful. Smart could solve problems. Smart didn't need comfort. Beautiful got defended. Charming got forgiven. Smart got assigned more work. By high school, I had stopped expecting fairness. I aimed for usefulness instead. I got good grades, worked weekends, saved money, bought my own laptop when no one offered help. My mother called me stingy for not sharing it enough. That should have told me everything. When I won a scholarship opportunity, my father said I was acting superior. When I stayed quiet, they said I was cold. When I set boundaries, they said I thought I was better than everyone. No matter what I did, they found a version that made me wrong. For a long time, I kept trying anyway. That's the embarrassing part to admit. People think neglected children become angry immediately. Sometimes we become efficient first. We learn how to earn scraps and call it love. So I cooked, cleaned, covered little expenses no one mentioned, remembered birthdays, helped smooth arguments before they became scenes. And every time I fixed something, I told myself they'd see me differently now. They rarely did. If anything, competence made them lean harder. When someone always carries weight, people stop noticing it exists. My sister understood the system before I did. She knew tears worked. Timing worked. Looking hurt at the right moment worked. She could spend recklessly, fail loudly, disappear from responsibility for weeks, then come back smiling and be welcomed like nothing happened. I resented her sometimes. Then I'd feel guilty, because part of me knew she hadn't built the system. She just learned how to win inside it. That realization took years. My anger was never only about her. It was about two parents who kept choosing the easier illusion. She made them feel admired. I made their lives function. Guess which one they valued more? By the time I moved to Nashville, I thought distance would fix something inside me. It helped. But distance doesn't erase training. Every time my mother called, I still answered too fast. Every time they needed help, part of me still hoped usefulness might finally turn into love. It never did. It just became more expensive. And when my sister got engaged, they came back to me with smiles, questions, and open hands. That should have warned me. Instead, I said yes. I answered a few questions first, then a few more. Then suddenly, I was useful again. That had always been the doorway back into my family. Not love. Need. By then, I'd already built a life they barely understood. I worked my way through college on scholarships, part-time jobs, and schedules so tight they left no room for self-pity. Morning classes, evening shifts, weekend work. Repeat. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because discipline became the only thing no one could take from me. While other people were figuring themselves out, I was learning how to keep moving when no one was clapping. That skill followed me into adulthood. I ended up in wedding and event operations almost by accident. My first coordinator quit 2 weeks before a major event, and I stepped in because someone had to. Turns out, chaos has patterns. Late vendors, missing linens, family drama, weather changes, budget lies, smiles covering panic. Most people freeze when 10 things go wrong at once. I get calmer. That used to confuse me. Later, I understood why. When you grow up in emotional instability, crisis can feel familiar. So I learned contracts, timelines, deposits, backup plans, who to trust, who only sounds confident, which emergencies matter, and which ones are just loud. People started requesting me by name, not because I was flashy, because things worked when I was there. There's a kind of respect that never makes speeches. It just keeps calling you back. I moved to Nashville and built something steady. My apartment wasn't glamorous, but the rent was paid. My fridge was stocked. My bills were handled on time. Nobody yelled through walls. Nobody punished silence. Peace can feel strangely quiet when you didn't grow up with it. At first, I mistook calm for emptiness. Then I realized calm was the first luxury I'd ever owned. Around that time, I met Daniel. We met during a venue walkthrough after a storm knocked out power. Half the room panicked. One bride cried over centerpieces. Someone blamed catering for the weather. Daniel laughed once softly and grabbed a flashlight. That got my attention. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He was trying to be helpful. Those are very different instincts. We talked in a dim hallway over ruined seating charts and battery candles. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. That mattered more than I admitted then. My family saw a daughter who was too serious. The rest of the world kept trusting me with expensive days, broken plans, and impossible deadlines. Funny how strangers recognized my value faster than blood ever did. And when my sister announced her engagement, my phone started ringing again. My mother sounded breathless. My father suddenly interested. Even relatives I hadn't heard from in months had opinions. That was the effect my sister always had. She could create momentum without building anything underneath it. By then, she had reinvented herself more times than most people change passwords. Boutique fitness one year, lifestyle content the next, event hosting after that. Then, brand strategy, though no one could explain for whom. Nothing lasted. But in our family, failure never stayed failure for her. It got renamed potential. That used to frustrate me more than I liked to admit. I kept thinking reality would eventually matter. It does. Just not on everyone's timeline. She knew how to look successful long before she knew how to be stable. Perfect photos, curated captions, expensive taste on borrowed money, confidence strong enough to distract people from asking practical questions. My parents love that version of her. She made them feel elevated. When she walked into a restaurant, they sat straighter. When she dated someone wealthy, they acted chosen. When she posted polished pictures, they borrowed the glow like it belonged to all of us. I think that was the real addiction, not her. What she reflected back to them. Part of me pitied her sometimes. Imagine being praised most when you're performing. Imagine never knowing if people love you or just enjoy the show. Still, pity doesn't erase damage. Because while I was building a life that could stand on its own, she was being rewarded for appearances. And people rewarded for appearances rarely learn limits. So when she got engaged to a corporate attorney named Brandon Carter, my family treated it like a merger with royalty. And that's when they decided my skills belonged to her wedding. It started small. A quick text from my mother asking if I knew a good florist. Then another asking whether a venue quote looked fair. Then my sister calling, not to ask how I was, but to say she needed a professional eye on mood boards and contracts. That phrase almost made me laugh. In my family, respect usually arrived disguised as convenience. Still, I answered. Part of me knew better. Part of me was tired of being the difficult daughter who always said no. And part of me, if I'm honest, still wanted one normal season with them. Hope can survive in people long after evidence dies. So I reviewed proposals on my lunch breaks. I flagged hidden fees, suggested realistic guest counts, connected them with a venue rep I trusted, helped negotiate timelines so they wouldn't get crushed by rush charges later. Every time I solved something, my mother acted relieved. Every time I solved something, no one asked what it cost me. That pattern should have felt familiar. My sister barely thanked me. She was busy posting ring shots, tasting menus, and captions about building our forever. Online, it looked effortless. Offline, it was mostly spreadsheets, deadlines, and me. I didn't resent helping at first. I'm good at logistics. I like order. There's satisfaction in taking chaos and making it workable. What bothered me was something quieter. They only spoke to me warmly when I was useful. My mother's voice softened when she needed a referral. My father suddenly valued my opinion when numbers got tight. My sister praised my taste whenever she wanted free labor dressed as sisterhood. Then the request would pass. And so would the warmth. That kind of affection leaves a strange bruise. It feels real while it's happening, then disappears the second the task is done. Daniel noticed before I did. He'd hear me hang up the phone and ask, "Did they ask about you at all?" Sometimes I'd say yes. Usually, I'd change the subject, because admitting the truth out loud made it harder to ignore. I told myself families get weird around weddings. Stress makes people self-centered. Big events distort priorities. Maybe after the ceremony, things would settle. That was me translating disrespect into temporary inconvenience. I was still doing that then. Meanwhile, the budget kept climbing. Better lighting, more flowers, luxury transportation, designer upgrades no guest would remember 3 weeks later. They kept calling it an investment. I remember thinking, investment in what? Love doesn't need chandeliers, but image does. And the more expensive their fantasy became, the more they leaned on the daughter they never considered valuable. I should have stepped back sooner. Instead, I kept helping until they invited me to one final planning dinner. That was the night they stopped pretending. I remember carrying a bottle of wine to the front door like I was bringing optimism with me. The house looked the same as always. Warm lights, perfect candles, music low in the background. The kind of atmosphere people build when they want a room to feel healthier than it is. My mother hugged me too quickly. That's how I knew she was performing. My sister was at the table surrounded by binders, swatches, guest lists, and that bright, polished energy she used whenever attention was guaranteed. My father stood near the kitchen island talking numbers in the vague, confident tone men use when they want credit before results. I almost turned around then. Part of me knew the night had edges on it. I just hadn't learned yet that intuition gets quieter the more often you ignore it. So I sat down. Dinner started harmless enough. Small talk, venue updates, floral changes, transportation options no sane person needed. My mother kept using phrases like elevated experience and unforgettable arrival. I kept thinking they were planning a wedding for strangers. Then my father mentioned a last-minute package upgrade, better lighting, premium bar, expanded decor window. He said it like money had become fictional. I looked around the table and asked the most normal question in the room. So, what does that mean for the rest of the wedding fund? Everything stopped. Not dramatically. Quietly. My mother's fork paused halfway down. My father reached for water he didn't need. My sister looked at her napkin like it had suddenly become interesting. Silence tells the truth faster than words. I felt something cold move through me. I asked again. What does that mean for my share? My mother set her fork down carefully. She always became calm right before cruelty. There really isn't a separate share anymore, she said. Most of it went toward your sister's wedding. She said it like weather, like something unfortunate but natural. I waited for the correction, for someone to say they'd replace it, explain it, apologize. No one did. I asked, including the money Grandma and Grandpa set aside for both of us? My father cleared his throat. This wedding benefits the whole family. That sentence still amazes me. People will rename theft if they think it sounds elegant enough. I turned to my mother. What about the money I added myself? Because I had contributed over the years. Small amounts at first. Then more when I could. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I believed fairness needed help surviving in that house. She shrugged. We all contribute to family, Emily. I wish I could tell you I stood up immediately, that I saw everything in one clean flash. Truth is, I just stared at her. There's a strange delay when betrayal comes from familiar hands. Your mind keeps searching for the version that hurts less. Then I asked the question she hated most. So you took what was mine, used it on her, and never planned to tell me? That was when she smiled. Not embarrassed. Not nervous. Pleased. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. Gold and dirt are not the same. Even now, I can remember the sound in the room after she said it. Nothing. No one gasped. No one objected. No one told her to stop. My sister clapped once. Sharp, smug, delighted. Then she laughed under her breath and said, Mom's harsh, but she's not wrong. I looked at all three of them and understood something painful. Cruelty doesn't always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it grows slowly in a room where no one interrupts it. My father stared at the table. That was his specialty. He called it keeping peace. Really, he just outsourced courage. My mother kept talking, explaining that my sister was marrying into a world where appearances mattered, that some investments make sense, that Daniel and I were doing something small and tasteful anyway. Small and tasteful. Funny phrase. People with no character often mock what doesn't need an audience. I thought I would cry. I thought years of swallowed hurt would finally break loose right there between the salad plates and centerpieces. Instead, I felt still, calmer than I had any right to feel. That scared me more than anger would have, because anger wants to be seen. Clarity doesn't. I realized they expected tears, maybe shouting, something emotional they could later call unstable, jealous, dramatic. They were prepared for pain. They were not prepared for consequence. So I stood up. My mother sighed and said, Don't be dramatic. My sister rolled her eyes. Seriously? Over money? Over money, as if money was the point. It was never about money. It was about being told, once again, that whatever was mine could become hers, if they wanted it badly enough. I picked up my coat. my bag, my keys. My father finally spoke. "We can discuss this later." That was another family habit. Delay accountability until the victim gets tired. I looked at him and almost felt sorry. Some people lose their families, one silence at a time. I said nothing. That was the part they least understood. I walked past the framed photos, past the polished hallway table, past years of trying to earn warmth from people who only respected leverage. The front door closed behind me. Cold air hit my face. I got into my car, set the wine bottle on the passenger seat, and stared through the windshield for a few seconds. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Then I opened my laptop, because unlike them, I knew exactly how much of that wedding was built on borrowed support. I opened my laptop in the driver's seat and started with the venue. They had secured a temporary hold through a relationship I'd spent years building. Not a favor. Trust. There's a difference, and people who use connections rarely understand it. I wrote one clean email. Professional, brief, clear. I was withdrawing my personal recommendation from any pending flexibility tied to the Brandon Carter wedding booking. Future terms should be reviewed directly with the clients. No insults, no drama. Just gravity returned to the room. Next came the florist. They'd approved reduced pricing through a referral code linked to my company network. I clarified that code was no longer authorized for private use, then transportation, then a planner they'd been leaning on for rushed accommodations. Then one final note stating I held no financial responsibility for any outstanding balances connected to the event. I read each message twice before sending, not because I doubted myself, because I'd been trained to doubt myself whenever I protected myself. That conditioning runs deep. Sometimes the hardest boundary is the one no one can argue with. I hit send, one by one. No shaking hands, no dramatic tears. Just the quiet click of consequences leaving my outbox. For a second, I sat there listening to my own breathing. Part of me expected guilt to hit immediately. It didn't. What I felt first was space. The kind that opens when you stop carrying something that was never yours. I started the car and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, their house looked warm and expensive, and completely unaware of what had just changed. That image stayed with me. Some homes look strongest right before the lights flicker. The phone rang before I reached the highway. My mother. I let it ring. Then my sister. Then my father. Then my mother again. I placed the phone face down and kept driving toward Nashville. The road was dark, almost empty. Mile markers passing, dashboard glow. My pulse finally slowing for the first time that night. I realized something then. They never feared hurting me. They feared losing access to me. There's a painful freedom in learning the difference. By the time I crossed county lines, voicemails were stacking up. First annoyed, then urgent, then confused. I still didn't listen. People who ignore warnings rarely deserve immediate explanations. Around midnight, I stopped for gas and checked the screen. 11 missed calls. By 1 in the morning, it was 32. By sunrise, 47. I woke up on my couch in Nashville with sunlight across the floor and my phone vibrating itself in circles on the coffee table. 47 missed calls from my mother, 18 from my sister. A few from my father, which somehow said the most. He only called when silence stopped working. There were voicemails stacked like debris. I played the first one. My mother sounded furious, breathless, off balance. "Emily, call me back right now. You're taking this too far." Too far. Funny phrase from someone who stole from me at dinner. The second voicemail was my sister, still trying to sound above it, but panic was leaking through every word. "Do not do this to me." The florist paused production. "The venue needs confirmation. Call me now." Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Just fix it. That's when I knew nothing had changed inside them. Only the pressure had. I made coffee before listening to another message. My father this time. Short. controlled, asking me to be reasonable. People often ask for reason the moment consequences arrive. I sat there in my quiet apartment, mug warming my hands, and felt something unfamiliar. Not revenge, relief. No one was yelling through walls. No one was rewriting reality in the next room. No one was demanding I solve a crisis they created. Just morning light, coffee, breathing room. Sometimes peace feels strange when chaos raised you. I checked the text thread. Caps lock, threats, pleading, guilt. Then more pleading. The emotional stages moved fast. I stared at the screen for a long moment and typed one sentence. Why are you begging a piece of dirt? Then I muted the thread and set the phone down. For the first time in years, their emergency was not my schedule. And while they were trying to save a wedding, I was starting to understand something bigger. They didn't need me as family. They needed me as infrastructure. The wedding still happened. Of course it did. People who build their identity around appearances will sacrifice almost anything to keep the curtain up one more night. I heard updates through cousins, old family friends, and the kind of gossip that travels fastest when expensive people start sweating. My father moved money he shouldn't have touched so quickly. My mother borrowed from relatives she privately judged for years. My sister cut unnecessary extras, which apparently meant anything guests wouldn't notice on camera. The dress stayed. Naturally. Image always survives longer than honesty. They kept the venue, but not the original package. They kept the reception, but tension leaked through every polished detail. They kept the performance, but barely. One cousin told me vendors looked irritated before the ceremony even began. Another said my mother was smiling too hard, which is a phrase every adult understands. A family friend overheard an argument near the service entrance about unpaid balances. That one didn't surprise me. Debt gets loud in hallways. What interested people more was my absence. Apparently, guests kept asking why a twin sister wasn't there. The answers changed depending on who asked. I had a work emergency. I was sick. I was overwhelmed. I had relationship problems. I was being dramatic. My favorite lie was that I'd become emotionally unstable. That sounded like my mother's handwriting. I looked at the wedding photos once. My sister smiling like she'd won something. Brandon posing like a man beside a purchase. My mother elegant and exhausted. My father older than I remembered. Everyone polished. No one peaceful. That was the part photos never capture. You can rent flowers, lighting, and violinists. You can't rent ease. I expected to feel angry seeing those pictures. Instead, I felt distant. Maybe because for the first time I could see the machine without standing inside it. They had spent years treating me like the extra piece. Turns out I was the part that kept everything steady. And once that truth settled in, I stopped checking their wedding updates altogether. Instead, I started paying attention to my own life. One Saturday morning, Daniel and I drove out to see a small lakeside property just outside Nashville. Gravel road, old trees, soft light over the water, nothing flashy, nothing trying too hard. I loved it immediately, not because it was perfect, because it was honest. No grand staircase, no imported chandeliers, no room designed to impress people who would gossip in the parking lot later. Just space, quiet, air that felt clean. Daniel looked at me and smiled the way calm people do. No performance, no pressure. You can breathe here, he said. That line stayed with me. We talked guest lists on the drive home, cut names that felt like obligations, added names that felt like relief, chose a local chef instead of a luxury caterer, picked music we actually liked. Every decision felt strangely healing. I realized how many years I had confused celebration with spectacle. Real joy doesn't need witnesses who resent you. It just needs peace. Part of me still felt guilty for feeling happy while my family was scrambling. Then I remembered something simple. Their chaos was not proof of my duty. So I let myself enjoy the season I'd nearly missed. And about 3 months later, the first real cracks started reaching me. It began with a late-night message from an old college friend. "Is your sister okay?" That question is rarely about wellness. It usually means damage has become visible. I asked why. She said my sister had been posting vague quotes about loneliness, betrayal, and fake love. Then she'd been seen crying at a restaurant while Brandon left early. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Not because I was shocked, because some endings announce themselves long before they arrive. My sister had always loved being chosen. She just never learned to ask what she was being chosen for. Status can look romantic from a distance. Up close, it often sounds transactional. I heard more over the next few weeks. Brandon was traveling constantly. Arguments over spending had become routine. His patience disappeared the same speed their wedding photos lost engagement online. Once applause fades, people meet the marriage they actually built. Around the same time, my father's financial confidence started collapsing in public. That one almost felt inevitable. He had always treated money like a personality trait. The smartest man in the room, the guy who could outmaneuver math through sheer certainty. Then the bills arrived. Rolling balances became pressure. Pressure became rushed decisions. Rushed decisions became visible mistakes. Someone in his professional circle learned he'd borrowed privately from people he should never have mixed into personal problems. I never got every detail. You rarely do with pride-driven disasters. But I heard enough to know credibility had cracked, and men like my father often survive on reputation long before income. My mother's boutique followed next. For years it had run on image, favors, and the illusion of momentum. Stylish launch events, perfect displays, social photos, selective storytelling. But polish is expensive when profit is thin. She started discounting inventory and calling it a seasonal strategy. Canceled charity commitments she used to brag about. Friends who loved her table stopped calling once there was nothing to sit around. That was hard to hear in a way I didn't expect. Not because I missed her world, because I saw how much of her identity had depended on strangers approving the set design. Some people never build a self beneath the performance. Then life asks for one. The messages to me started again. Unknown numbers. Distant relatives. Former neighbors suddenly preaching family values. My mother even mailed a letter to my office instead of my apartment. That detail told me everything. She still cared more about access than shame. The letter was careful, polished, manipulative in the way only practiced people can be. Wedding stress had caused misunderstandings. Families say things they don't mean. Your sister needs her twin right now. We all need healing. Interesting word. Healing usually gets requested by the people who caused the wound once consequences become inconvenient. She never mentioned calling me dirt. Never mentioned taking what was mine. Never mentioned only noticing my value when it developed a price tag. I threw the letter away. A week later, my sister called from a private number. I answered before I fully decided to. Part curiosity, part closure, part old conditioning that hadn't fully died yet. She sounded tired. No sparkle, no performance music behind the voice. She said marriage was harder than expected. Brandon was distant, critical, irritated. Then she moved to the real reason for the call. Did I still know anyone who could help Mom's boutique with a high-end event partnership? Maybe Daniel knew investors. I almost laughed. Even in collapse, some people don't seek truth. They seek new scaffolding. I told her no. She accused me of enjoying their pain, of waiting to feel superior. That was when I finally said something I should have learned years earlier. I don't need you to fail to know my worth. I just needed to stop letting you define it. She hung up. Not long after that, I heard my parents were quietly selling the house. Officially, they wanted less maintenance. Unofficially, debt had found the front door. I sat in my kitchen that night, looking at nothing, while Daniel moved around making dinner. There was no triumph in me, Just a strange sadness for how many people would rather lose everything than apologize early. And 8 months after that dinner, they called me together. I was leaving work when my phone lit up with an unknown video request. I almost ignored it. Then something in me said answer. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Maybe the last loose thread asking to be cut cleanly. I tapped accept. My mother filled the screen first. I barely recognized her. No polished makeup. No lifted posture. No bright room arranged for appearances. She looked smaller somehow, like life had finally removed the stage lights. My father sat beside her, shoulders rounded, eyes older than the months between us should have allowed. And behind them, on the far edge of a sofa, sat my sister. Quiet. No perfect hair, no practiced smile, no energy borrowed from attention. Just silence. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then my mother started crying. Real crying this time. Uneven. Unflattering. The kind people can't control. She said my name the way drowning people say sure. They had lost the house. My sister and Brandon were separating. My father's career had taken a hit. Things were hard. Then she said the sentence I'd wanted for years and no longer needed. We were wrong. I expected satisfaction. What I felt was distance. Because apologies arriving after collapse often sound less like truth and more like timing. Still, I listened. My father said he should have stopped things long ago, that he called it peace, when really he was protecting the wrong person from consequences. That line landed harder than I expected, not because it healed anything, because it was accurate. My sister still wouldn't meet the camera. I wondered if shame had finally reached her, or if she was simply tired. There's a difference. My mother asked if we could start over, if I could help the family heal. Interesting how help keeps changing clothes. Sometimes it looks like money, sometimes logistics, sometimes forgiveness. But underneath, it's still the same request. Come carry us again. I looked at all three of them and felt something calm settle in my chest. No anger, no urgency. Just clarity earned the slow way. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Wrong about what? My mother closed her eyes first, like the truth was something she had to brace for. Then she said they were wrong about me, about my worth, about the way they treated me, about choosing appearances over fairness. She was crying harder now. Maybe from regret, maybe from consequence. Those two emotions wear similar faces. My father spoke next, quietly. He said I had been the one keeping things steady for years, and he knew it. He just kept telling himself it was easier not to interfere. That sentence told me more than any apology could. Some people don't fail because they hate you. They fail because comfort matters more than courage. I looked at him and felt sadder than angry. Because cowardice can damage a family just as deeply as cruelty. My sister finally raised her eyes to the screen. She said she thought I'd always be there, that I could handle more than everyone else, that she never realized how much I carried. I believed she meant some of it, but late honesty still arrives late. That's the cost no one talks about. You can tell the truth eventually and still lose everything it should have protected. I took a slow breath and looked at the three people who had shaped so much of my life by misunderstanding it. For years I wanted them to see me clearly. Now they finally did. And strangely, it no longer belonged to them. Then my mother asked the question she should have feared asking. Was there any way to make this right? My mother asked it softly, like volume could make the question smaller. I looked at the screen and understood something people learn too late. Some damage doesn't stay in the moment it happened. It spreads into years, into identity, into the way you learn to love yourself after being taught not to. I told them I was getting married soon. Small ceremony, lakeside, peaceful, filled with people who had never made me earn basic dignity. My mother started crying harder. She asked if there was still a chance they could come. My sister finally spoke my name like it belonged to a real person. My father said he'd understand whatever I decided, which sounded noble now that cost had arrived. I almost laughed. Boundaries always seem harsh to people who benefited from your lack of them. Part of me wanted to comfort them. Old habits don't die dramatically. They linger. They whisper. They ask you to carry one more thing. But compassion without memory is how cycles restart. So I stayed steady. I told them I didn't hate them. That was true. Hatred keeps people tied together more than love sometimes. What I felt was finished. I told my mother she taught me exactly who I was in that family the night she called me dirt and expected me to stay. I told my father silence is still a decision. I told my sister being favored is not the same as being loved. Then I said, the one sentence I had earned, I'm not coming back. No shouting, no revenge speech, no dramatic exit. Just truth placed gently on the table. My mother whispered, please. My father looked down. My sister opened her mouth, then closed it. For years they had mistaken my patience for permission. Now they were learning the difference. I ended the call, and a month later, I walked toward the life they never thought I'd build. The ceremony was held beside the lake just after sunset. Warm lights hung through old trees. Water moved softly behind the chairs. People laughed the way relaxed people laugh when no one is performing for anyone else. I remember standing there for a second before the music started. Just breathing. No tension in my shoulders. No need to scan the room for criticism. No wondering who might turn joy into a scene. That feeling alone was worth more than any wedding fund. When I walked toward Daniel, he smiled the same calm smile that first got my attention in a dark hallway months earlier. Steady people are underrated. They don't create fireworks on demand. They create safety over time. I used to think love had to be dramatic to be real. Maybe because drama was the language I grew up around. But drama is not intimacy. Chaos is not passion. And being needed is not the same as being loved. Those were expensive lessons, but I'm grateful I learned them before saying vows. Our guests were people who had shown up in ordinary ways, friends who helped carry boxes, coworkers who checked in without gossip, neighbors who remembered birthdays, people who respected boundaries without treating them like insults. Real love is usually practical before it is poetic. Someone adjusting your chair, someone saving you a plate, someone noticing you look tired and handing you water. I didn't think about my family much that night. That surprised me. For years, they were the center of every emotional weather system in my life. I assumed major milestones would always be measured against them, but healing changes the map. At some point during dinner, I realized I was no longer reacting to them. I was simply living. There's a freedom in that no revenge can match. People imagine justice as the other side's suffering. Sometimes justice is waking up peaceful while they keep repeating the lessons they refused to learn. I don't know what became of every detail afterward. My parents downsized. My sister moved through another reinvention. Brandon became a story people mentioned carefully and then changed subjects. Life kept moving, the way it always does. But I know what became of me. I stopped negotiating with people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped confusing access with love. I stopped volunteering to be useful where I was not valued. That changed everything. If there's any lesson in what happened, it's this. Favoritism doesn't only wound the overlooked child. It weakens the favored one, corrupts the parents, and trains everyone to mistake imbalance for normal. And silence feeds it. So does guilt. So does staying where your dignity keeps getting traded for peace. Family should be the first place you learn respect. If it isn't, you're allowed to learn it somewhere else. You're allowed to build a table where kindness is normal. You're allowed to close doors that only open when people need something. And protecting your peace from those who notice your worth only after losing access to it is not cruel. It's self-respect. That was the real inheritance they never meant to leave me. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that being needed is not the same as being loved. A lot of people spend years chasing approval through sacrifice, silence, and giving too much, especially with family. But respect that only shows up when you are useful was never respect to begin with. Real love is steady, honest, calm. It doesn't ask you to lose yourself just to keep the peace. And it is never too late to set boundaries, choose dignity, and build a life where kindness feels normal. Peace often begins the moment you stop carrying what was never yours to hold.